Hello, Robyn. How are you?
Good, except for we're still unscheduled. Oh, now we're live. Hi, Stephen. How you doing?
I'm all right. If we go in and out with internet issues, it's just the way it goes, suddenly. So I really liked your share piece today. I'm a big, probably not surprised to most people listening. I'm a big Cher fan, and I was her movies. I mean, she was huge in the '80s,
Oh
around
yeah,
when I was a teenager. So Witches of Eastwick and um,
which we
Moonstruck.
discussed last week when I had Jack Nicholson's hair from that movie. Um,
Yes, when Michelle Pfeiffer was the ugly one. It's not like we can make that work. She could. It's. All right.
yeah.
It was a something, but they were all stunning. But yes, Cher was great. No, great actor, a great comedic
Well, no,
time.
actually, no. What's her face? The one. Oh my God. Like I can't even think of her name because I'm so scared. I don't like people are
Susan,
gonna yell if you
Susan
say her name.
Sarandon.
And Susan Sarandon. Um,
So
that is
she
a
was
joke based on
she
like
was
what we were
the dog.
talking about later. She was the homely one, I
She
thought,
was meant
like,
to be the
because she
dog.
was like, yeah. And then she was all like, now I'm wild, I've got my hair all big and shit. Um, like,
Yeah.
good for you. Big hair is like the key to sexiness, I think.
Well, big hair
Um,
was everything back then. But something about you had mentioned in an article about how Cher, this period of like Cher and a lot of, I mean, even goes back to Charo and others were considered jokes because a lot of the
yeah.
male dominated media, white male dominated media, just didn't take women seriously or anything that women might have liked or God forbid gay people liked. So it's very clear that she was
Well, I
not
think it was
considered.
always very clear, like, which women were okay and which women were not. Um, although even I say that, but there were, a lot of exceptions. Like there were a lot of men who were like, "Oh, I like Joni Mitchell. Joni Mitchell's okay." Or I think Stevie Nicks was one of those people who was okay and acceptable. I don't think they were mad at Joan Jett. But like for the most part, there was like a huge, especially like when I was growing up in the early '90s, like a whole thing in general about female singers, particularly female singers that did not write their own songs. That as if every male singer on earth wrote his own songs, which is not necessarily the case. Um, it's just something that really bothered me because I grew up like loving Cher's movies and Dolly Parton's movies. And then it was like you'd see like, oh, people treat them like they're a joke. They're a joke. And it wasn't until like, I would say like 10 years ago that maybe 10, 15 years ago that people started being like, oh wait, Dolly Parton is actually awesome.
Yeah, and she
I'll give
was
my
a
old
great
roommate credit
songwriter as
for.
well. I'm sorry,
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
she was a great songwriter as well, right? Like
Oh yeah, no,
so
Dolly
even
Parton was
beyond
supremely
those,
talented, but people were like, she has big boobs and like wears tacky outfits. Not so sure about that. There was actually that this one interview that she did where someone actually asked her like, because she was a very good actress. I was a big fan of several of her movies.
mhm.
Steel Magnolias, Straight Talk, which was partially filmed in my favorite bar in Chicago. Um, like this interviewer asked, would you get a breast reduction in order to be, considered for more serious roles? Um, and she was like, I'm going to have those serious roles anyway. I'm not going to get surgery for that. But there was this whole like, let's laugh at these women culture with like, especially like the general like late night jokes, Simpsons jokes, everything where it was just like, you weren't supposed to take them seriously regardless of how talented they were.
Uh, yeah, and that had reminded me because this week, or last week rather, Rolling Stones had released of their readers,
That
presumably,
was from 2011.
yeah. But it, even that
So
list,
what's
there's no
your
list, but it was like a weird. I mean, those acts existed before 2011 as well, right? That were,
Yeah.
you know, so it's just a very strange, and it puts to me in a kind of a sight of how essentially the gatekeepers, right, the people who
Oh, yeah.
define what is acceptable and whatever, have this huge blind spot of like, well, clearly there's nothing wrong if I have a list of all these and they're predominantly white men, or if it's presented in a way that because I think if you're talking about vocalists, I don't think, why does it have to be, why do you need to have it where they wrote their own music per se? Like, it's sort of like
Yeah.
you're trying to come up with ways to exclude certain all women acts or whatever, or band. But I mean, I'm a big disco fan, and there were some amazing women forward groups then that don't, like A Taste of Honey and
Yeah.
Sledge, and they get no credit because disco was essentially too black and too gay for the Gatekeepers. So it was also one of those things that was considered a big joke.
Yeah.
And take you a while to sort of like, well, no, actually, I kind of enjoy this stuff, right? You sort of realize, wait a minute, this
Like,
is pretty good.
this is actually good.
But
I mean, the Bee Gees were actually legitimately very good songwriters, if you want to even talk about that.
But yes, it was sort of the sense of, it's okay. You can like Zeppelin, you can like all that, but don't necessarily say that is inherently superior to music that people are dancing to or something, or like, gay people like, or whatever, or women like. But I mean, I think similar to the controversy.
Well, any music that people dance to, automatically unserious, because we don't like dancing. The only real music is music you cannot dance to.
Yes, Morrissey's "Hang the DJ," because it's like all
so
that.
Weird that white guys came up with that rule.
Yeah, it was just very, like, there's interviews of Morrissey in the 80s.
Nothing like so inadvertently convenient about that.
Just so angry about, Prince and Whitney Houston or whatever. It was all like some of the end of the world. And I know people who didn't like George Michael, and it's like he was a tremendous songwriter and musician, but something.
Literally no one on earth has ever been as talented as Prince. Is my.
Yeah, I mean, and there was obviously part of it was a sense of mopiness is what we want now, and he wasn't as, you're just talking if it's silly love songs, because Paul McCartney got hit on that. So it's like love, it's about love or sex. It's not clever and deep, even though that's not always true, because a lot of, the Rolling Stones work was also about love and sex. So who can keep up with the rules, Robyn? I suppose that is the.
I know they keep changing.
But
remember, for a while it was because people used to hate the Beach Boys, and then all of a sudden, like, the fancy people discovered Pet Sounds, and we're like, wait a minute, no, I like Beach Boys better than the Beatles now, and that's like a cool thing to do. And it's just a very it's very interesting the way that we differentiate, high art versus low art, and it is very often based on well, what do women like? One thing that I thought was interesting, on Twitter, someone asked me about what kind of fashion, or asked someone else in a thread that I was on at, about women dressing for other women. And she was like, well, what do people wear? What do women wear that's just for other women? I would say specifically this sweater. Anything that Cher wore, I think we don't think about, let me rearrange my thoughts here. There is an assumption that everything women do is specifically for the male gaze, to the point where when women say, oh, no, I'm actually doing this for me, it's, oh, sure, yeah, honey. And yeah, I get it, as far as heels are concerned, because that is very painful, but I'm actually wearing heels because I like freaking dudes out. Men hate it when I wear heels. They're not happy about it at all.
And also Prince wear. There are there's physical, obviously the physical issues of hills beside, but there are things they do to the body, and there are things that ways that they look with certain clothing that certainly has an aesthetic purpose. That if you're into fashion, I always, that felt interesting to me because because often the idea would be, oh, I don't have men in my life anymore, so I will. In movies, right? It's like suddenly the sweatpants, or like I no longer care about fashion or whatever. As if we are big fashion expert. It's kind of like I don't think
I know men don't actually care about fashion. Men would be thrilled if we're all walking around in like Laura Ashley dresses and shit. Like
like a good Star Trek uniform, like form fitting, like 7 of 9 wore. We'd be like, yeah, that's great. You just wear that every day, and we'd be.
This is like the time I was like, oh, no one's gonna like. I wore a TARDIS dress because it was clean, and I was like, this is ridiculous. I can't believe I'm like going out in this, and like they were like, dudes love the TARDIS dress.
It's an awesome outfit. Yeah, so there's like there are certain types of, you've probably encountered women who will associate heteronormativity with any effort. So if it's kind of like, I'm done with life, I'm only going to date women now and like not care about myself, and like actual lesbians would be like, well, I mean, we're different, sure, than men, but we would like you to care about life and the world. Like it's not like no.
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally know anyone who's done that.
Yeah,
but
it's not successful. But it's like a often a joke in media of like, who needs.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, it is sort of like, well, no, I mean, I think anyone you date, probably you need to make an effort to exist in the world. It doesn't have to be a certain way. It doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be. If you don't want to wear makeup, don't wear makeup. If you don't want to do all these things. But yes, as you said, not everything is for what is called like the male gaze. It can just be like you enjoy it. Fashion is but isn't that something that comes up as being?
It's not considered a respected artistic outlet.
Well, fashion is sort of considered frivolous. So the serious character on the show, the serious woman, has the glasses, and it's like, oh, fashion is frivolous. Like in Modern Family, was the more recent things that did that, and like the frivolous sister is into fashion, and it's like, well, actually, you could be the reverse. There are a lot of frivolous math majors, and then there's a lot of, really smart.
I think people get very stuck in, tropes in general, and feeling like people need to like be in like one, either you're serious or you're not serious. And if you're serious, you don't wear makeup, you don't, like pop music, and I think that there's so many levels to that, and the way that people just want to like sort of telegraph who everyone is immediately. Another thing I said the other day was that I did not believe that marine biologists were real, and in fact I believe it is a made-up profession that parents just tell kids so that their kids sound precocious. And I believe that. But I think so many people like get very into like the shorthand of I am smart. This is what smart people do, and so, pardon?
That's like working with whales, right? Like that, someone has to do that.
Yeah,
that's a big. Whales are big. That's a huge area of study.
I'm kidding. It was a joke.
I know.
Oh, you know what? You probably totally missed the entire era of every kid wants to be a marine biologist.
I was aware of that era of everyone doing it. I don't know if it was connected to the Seinfeld episode, The Marine Biologist. I think it sounds like a very cool thing to do as jobs go, like to be involved. Human biology is very boring, and there's travel.
Still, it was just like there were all these kids being like, I want to be a marine biologist. And I'd be like, bitch, you do not. Your parents told you to say that.
It's a lot of, I wanted to be an astronomer because of Star Trek, and then I discovered all the Newtonian physics and quickly dropped that class. It's like, oh, like this is much. I'm just going to write about science or whatever.
See, I wanted to be Liza Minnelli, another person who, has been treated like a joke despite being obscenely talented.
Oh, she's concealed, yeah, and very funny, and
Yeah,
outlived them all.
exactly.
Mimi see it as we'd be hoping we'd be wearing color-coded jumpsuits by now. Dibs on blue for educators.
You know what? I have Mimi, I agree with you. I have been really confused by the lack of, why are we not in unitard mode yet? Every Star Trek, every Twilight Zone episode that takes place in the future, everyone is wearing unitards all of the time. I mean, I'm personally pretty grateful that we're not wearing unitards. I don't even like a romper, but that's always been my, that as soon as it's the future, that's what's happening. I'm waiting for that, not the hover cars and boards and whatnot.
Nah, yeah. I always it's clear, like there's the blue for Medicaid, I always thought the early Next Generation had that of like blue and then a red for command. It's a nice sort of, I know what everyone's doing. You come into the room. It's very simple. I mean, they probably have cured colored blindness by now, but that's actually itself its own big debate. And our friend Claire, I was hoping to have her on at some point to discuss that, because there's a whole thing about presentation of disability in science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, well, should we show people who are, obviously we should show disabled people exist, and we should show people who are, but then it's like, they don't want to show anyone being the perception that certain things have been cured, even though, like,
oh, interesting.
If you think about it, 400 years ago, potentially both of us could be blind, or we might have had accidents that we were easily recovered from that would have paralyzed us 400 years ago. So is it trying to erase disability by just acknowledging that, well, you have faster than light travel, maybe you can, I mean, a friend of mine is still obsessed because Star Wars had this whole plot line where a woman dies in childbirth, whereas it was like, you've got robot arms, why are women dying in childbirth? They're like meant like a guy lost his arm. You put a Luke Skywalker had the hand, and like you've got flight. There's R2D2. Once there's like, should that be the list?
I think that's actually kind of
in childbirth. Then you can get R2D2, and there should be like steps to that. But
yeah, they're 1,000 years in the future, and still no one gives a damn about women's health care.
Yeah, maybe that whole film was insane. It's
women still trying to like get a doctor to believe that she has whatever she has.
Well, it's Revenge of the Sith. It's the one where Natalie Portman's character, she's a senator. She has to hide her pregnancy because she can't apparently be a senator and pregnant. And I haven't seen the film in 17 years, so maybe someone will explain that I'm misremembering it because it was so terrible. My mind.
What was the movie again?
It was one of the last Star Wars prequel.
See, I never saw any of the.
Is hiding her pregnancy because apparently she would lose her job if she's pregnant. So it's like, what is this, Space Florida? Like, what is going on? Like, why can't she be a senator and pregnant? Like, what the hell is happening? And then she dies in
Space Florida. I lost it.
This is nuts. So, I mean, maybe fans who are watching will later correct me in the comments that I'm misremembering a key element. But I remember even early 30-something me being appalled by what I just seen. I was like, what the hell am I watching? But yes, the ability to present the future has been very difficult for certain, both in fashion, because they never figure out how they get the jumpsuits, like what you wear in Starfleet, but then their casual wear is terrible.
Yeah.
It's just, that is
there casual wear on Star Trek?
Yes. So you'll see like, Riker or Picard will be wearing like some sort of casual, and it's just like, what the hell is that? Like, that's awful. But you try to predict where this will go. Like, fashion is very hard to predict. And like military, the concept of what a military outfit would be, you can kind of do.
Well, like, futurism in fashion is always like really fascinating, I think, because then you can see like what people, like the incredible datedness of what people thought the future was going to look like fashion-wise.
Oh, fashion, technology. I mean, all of, the stuff from the 80s, even the 70s, all sci-fi is rooted in concepts of
Mhm.
no internet. So everything is very, you need to, I've got to get this specific document to you because that has plans on it, because there's no way I can transfer these plans safely to you.
Yeah.
They only exist in one place. So essentially all of that really, I mean, I always look at it as a writer, is that you have to look at sci-fi as always reflecting sort of parallel to the times now. So, there's a show called Star Trek Discovery that was, when it premiered, was aired, was slightly before Kirk's time. And then they say, well, wait a minute, how can there be a female captain on that show when on a really sexist episode of Star Trek, they explained that there had been no female starship captains? It's like, well, because that's terrible. And no one wants to imagine a world where there were no women, broke that glass ceiling for like 300 years from now. That makes sense.
That is actually very depressing to think about.
Yeah, that makes sense for the 60s, not for now. So you can just.
What actually is interesting, and I was just thinking this, fashion generally tends to be cyclical, like, stuff that's in style right now is, 90s retro, which is a little scary. When I was younger, everyone was dressing like, disco for a while. That was really big. I had a Saturday Night Fever t-shirt and everything. That is never reflected.
No, they don't reflect, but that's a great point.
Science fiction.
I would love if, because they call Star Trek Discovery, the fans call it Star Trek Disco, and I kept hearing it. It's like, maybe it is disco. That'd be awesome. Like, it just sort of turned around and everyone's
like they turned the beat around.
They're in disco now.
Yeah, and there are so many platform shoes.
I would love a Superman story where Krypton, when it blew up, was like space 70s. And like, she's got the big hair and everything. It's just full on disco, which explain the costume. And it's kind of like, this is the 70s. This is our peak of civilization. So this is something I'm writing about for tomorrow, but apparently conservatives, specifically Living Joke, Ted Cruz, was furious that Stacey Abrams was playing a character in the most recent Star Trek where she's the president of the Earth. And National Review literally said, Stacey Abrams does not deserve to be president of the Earth. And it's like, well, rude. And also, do you have trouble
not real
using facts and fiction? Probably.
Oh my God.
It's the National Review, but it's like, okay, there's a war going on, and you can't imagine this world where this Black woman is. And they had a behind the scenes video of the filming, and everyone, the cast, the crew, they love Stacey Abrams. Like, this is the show. It's like, look, I don't say that your crazy right-wing show does not, some right-winger does not deserve to be on that show. I'm not like Clint Eastwood didn't deserve to be Dirty Harry. Like, no, he was Dirty Harry. I think he's pretty consistent with the message of a right-wing.
I like how they really thought we cared about Tim Allen's show.
Oh yeah.
Like, did anyone though?
He's like,
I got kicked off the air because people were outraged. I'm like, I didn't even know that show existed, sir. Like,
I forgot. Like, I was still thinking you were talking about Home Improvement, and then I remembered he was.
Yeah, then we had that other one where.
And it got picked up again and whatever, but he was not. I don't know. I didn't watch the show enough to even know why it probably just bombed, because shows like that aren't particularly popular.
It's not like a thing anymore.
Wacky, those shows, it's like what they say, like, can this come back? So, well, no, they don't. No one does shows like this anymore. I don't know if anyone would want to watch an All in the Family or a Married to Children series, but because wacky dad type things aren't. I mean, the extent you would do that, it would be like a show like Modern Family, and Phil Dunphy is a very, it was a modern version of that kind of dad, but in a very different way. And
I've still never seen Modern Family.
I used to be in hotels a lot more when I was traveling for work, when certain things were on and you would see it. Now it's very hard for me to be casually aware of something, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, same.
So
I'm just now watching Cobra Kai. So
but Modern Family was right towards the end of where I would be casually aware of a TV show. I remember my wife and I think were in San Francisco for some reason, and it was on, and I remember catching it and whatever. And then I later would watch a few episodes because I really like the guy who plays Phil Dunphy, and of course Ed O'Neill, who was Al Bundy, was on that show. One of the greatest examples of being able to avoid typecasting. I mean, that show aired for 10 years and very successful. So good for him. And we discussed.
He also did that with Dutch, which I think is very underrated as like a movie. I thought that was a very good. I liked that when I was a kid.
Oh yeah, he. No, I really, and I liked Married Children quite a lot. He is obviously an avowed Democrat, but the series was very. I mean, it was a very different period as well. So to present. I mean, he's essentially apolitical in many ways. If you're presenting a kind of candidate, a person who was like I said, the idea that you can't have this Trump character anymore. The problem is no one wants a Trump character on TV
because we have enough of it in real life.
Well, yeah, but also not even Trump supporters would want to see him humiliated week after week. Like Al Bundy, you described it as the lovable oaf. These guys don't even want the lovable oaf. Ben Shapiro.
No, they want Al Bundy as hero.
Yes, and they presented. I mean, people loved him as a hero. There were conservatives who loved him as a hero, but even then, they kind of still were fine with him constantly failing. I mean, proven to be an idiot and a failure, and now no one wants that. Now, I mean, Al Bundy as president of the United States, which actually happened, is not appealing. And it's a weird thing of how people do comedy or understand stuff. So and we've discussed this. You've worked in retail, and you know it. Like, obviously, I'm not defending fat jokes. I don't think fat jokes are terrible. But Al Bundy was a guy who makes no money, and the fat woman who comes in the store and he would usually come in and be rude to him as someone who works in retail, and he is from a position of powerlessness, lashing out in a way that I don't approve of. I reinforce again. Fat jokes are terrible, even if but anyone who's worked in retail has had obnoxious customers, and that is the sort of that's the dichotomy. So someone would imagine that, okay, well, I'm going to do my show, and some of this was sort of sometimes a challenge to Curb Your Enthusiasm, because Larry David is a very successful, happy person. So if he's yelling at this lady in a store for not, for sticking to some rule he thinks is silly or something, it's like, okay, well, now you're just a wealthy guy
complaining about shit.
Minimum wage, and that is less, that's less compelling to me.
Well, but here's the thing: Larry David is hilarious.
Absolutely.
A lot of the time, whether or not you can pull something off depends on whether or not you are actually entertaining, compelling, or hilarious. And I feel like that is what a lot of the, cancel culture, like, oh no, cancel culture people sort of miss. Like, if you were actually like that compelling, people might actually listen to you and hear what you have to say when you argued your point.
Yes, you have to
doing
accept
whatever.
And even in that show, Larry David presents himself. He's much more successful, obviously, than Al Bundy.
Yeah.
But he presents himself as someone who's marginalized. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard for him. It does not. It's very much a comedy of manners. He is ill-mannered in the world. He does not fit in. And what a lot of these folks complain about cancel culture is that this idea that they should be able to exist in the world and we will all be fine with them. But it's like, that is what you're describing.
It's
where you're
not realistic.
Everyone pretends that you're nice. That's that Twilight Zone episode with Bill Mooney. Like, everyone's like, it was real good you wrote that. It was really good that you said that trans people aren't really their gender identity. Yeah, really.
Don't send me to the cornfield.
I have to think clear thought. I'm not mad. I swear. It's like that's not how the world works. So yes, in the real world,
and the thing is, it's literally never worked like that.
People are going to tell you you're a jerk. That is what life is. That Times article was so infuriating because first off, and many people have done much better breakdowns. Gary wrote about it on Friday, but the idea that it leads with this idea that there's a constitutional right to not be shunned or shamed for the stuff you write, which literally does not exist. The government just can't come to your house and seize your printing press and take your cow away or something for, whatever the rule, things were that the British might have been doing. They can't do that now. You can say stuff, but you can be publicly shamed and humiliated. That's life. And what's very frustrating is that as someone who dabbles in the arts, the Times, your entire art section is cancel culture. There are people whose work it's crushed because you said it sucks. Like the guy in the room was just expressing himself, but he can't go out in public because they'd be like, "My God, you wrote that terrible thing." Like that's arts criticism in general. And I've also, but in arts criticism, is basically someone saying this other person's self-expression was garbage. Now, not always. Sometimes you say it's good, but believe me.
But no one actually wants to read the good reviews.
No. And
if they did,
people love the bad reviews. Like there was a classic one for Battlefield Earth, which came and went. But again, those are the great examples. So something that does very poorly just kind of vanishes. But people remember that the New York Times ripped apart Battlefield Earth, really made fun of and these guys talk about crying when they read some of these views. You get the reviews and you really are for everything, even fashion and so forth. You look to see, am I going to be humiliated or will people say this was good? And it's never so it's like a 50, that's a sucky, like a coin toss. It's like if they didn't exist, and that's an interesting thing now because when people say social media sucks, again, it's an idea of the gatekeepers are less useful. And I've talked about this in the arts, no one cares about the theater review now. They want to know what Robyn, hey, Robyn, what did you think of this play or this show or this concert? And now I'll see it. So it's more about leveraging what the public and word of mouth, leveraging that. But yes, no one has a right to express themselves without others using their free expression to say, was really a crappy movie you made, a crappy book you wrote, and a crappy opinion you expressed. What
it is, I think, with a lot of this is, the upset of the hierarchy. I'm not supposed to criticize something in the New York Times because I'm not a New York Times writer. I'm not, the same level as they are. I'm supposed to be, oh my God, I would like the New York Times to hire me. So, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. And I think that a lot of people who have been on top don't realize how often other people have kept their mouths shut throughout the years when they've been in awkward positions or felt like they had something to say because they didn't want their opportunities for advancement or, social status decimated at all. And a lot of the time that was people standing up for themselves. People didn't want to, say, hey, what you just said was really shitty because that person who said the shitty thing had more power than you.
You had to pick your battles.
And,
and that's on the lines of if you're a member of a marginal, so that it's the idea of it's not sort of both sides about who can write certain perspectives. If you're a member of a marginalized group, so if you're a Black or woman, it's more likely that I've been in a room around a lot of white people who said a lot of stuff without necessarily even, after a certain point, also they forget I'm there. I could even write it from the perspective of the unseen narrator, or I'm the okay person. They are usually expressing themselves as they want to express themselves. They're not hiding. Whereas most Black people I know, when they are in rooms with white people, especially, they're most likely their bosses or even their colleagues, they watch what they say, the whole concept.
That's what code switching is.
Yeah. And so it is certainly more plausible that a member of a marginalized group can write about what they've observed from a dominant group, especially because you have to know about white male culture, what they like, what they think. We're peppered with it. But if you're a member of the dominant group, come on, have you really had an honest conversation with a member of a marginalized group? Even a white woman, have you really gotten their perspective? Very rarely. Now, white men can kind of just think what they want to think and say what they want to say. So it's not even like, I think even the women in their own homes don't kind of call them on their crap as much, because it's just, there were times where
it's exhausting, because when people are like that, they get like, if you say the thing you did hurt me, even if it's just like, we're not talking politics, we're just talking like general human interaction. If you say that hurt me, instead of saying, you know, oh, I'm sorry, like a normal person, there are people who go to the well of, you know, why are you dragging me? Why are you, you know, trying to make me feel bad? And this is something I've observed entirely separately from politics, having nothing to do with that at all, just like regular human nature. And I feel like we're separating, like, so much of this shit isn't like, oh, it's this new phenomenon, or it's, you know, something that is very exclusive to media criticism, or, you know, anything like that. It's not. It's regular ass human interaction.
Oh yeah.
There are, you know, it's the difference between people who say, oh shit, I'm sorry I stepped on your foot, and people who are like, well, I wasn't trying to step on your foot.
Yeah.
You know?
And I remember the folks who take that perspective of like, this is what I've observed of the world, and I don't feel like I need any instant change. So people like Bill Maher and whatever, they find it frustrating if others are expressing themselves differently. Ken Paxton, and I mentioned him like last week about this, of where a couple in Texas, a nice couple, they had a trans child, and they had invited him over.
Yeah.
White people lived in his circle, and he talked about how very nice he was. He didn't misgender their child in front of him, and then, you know, later he went and he passed this horrible rule and whatever. It's like, well, yes, because often people will make exceptions for the good ones, or exceptions for people with a frame of reference. But then Kim Paxton's the same one who, there was an article about some significant achievements from women for 2021. Rachel Levine was on there, and he Paxton, Rachel Levine as a man. It's very offensive and horrible. And I think what happens, a lot of cancel, you touched on this with one person who was talking about being in class, like, why can't I talk about these things? It's like, well, you're talking about real human beings.
Yeah.
And, you know, if just because you didn't call me a racial epithet, you're saying something awful about another Black, I'm going to connect to myself. Same with you as a woman, I will connect. And I think this is idea of people being shocked of just like, why can't, I'm being very nice to you. And I think they sort of link it to identity politics. If it wasn't for identity politics, you would know that I am treating you as an individual very well while treating the collective terribly. Yeah. And I think that's why conservatives are very big on that idea of individualism, because what that happens is the few good ones who get in their circle will accept their beneficence. And then
they're okay.
Yeah. And I'm not, you know, most of us aren't Candace Owens or whatever, or not, will be like, that's not.
Well, thank goodness.
That's not really cool.
It would suck if you personally were Candace Owens. We would not be having this conversation right now.
Yes, I have better. I am very grateful. She gets more embarrassing every day, sadly. So but yeah, it's just, like Ken Paxton thinks that way. And he knew enough not to misgender, and he might say that just being
because it's awkward to insult people to their faces.
Exactly.
And the thing is that a lot of the time these people know that what they're saying is shitty. I know the difference between me doing something shitty and me like at least like really believing I'm correct on something. And I'm going to be a lot more defensive about the shit I'm probably wrong about. Or, you know, something where I'm embarrassed because I made an ass of myself socially. You know, historically, not now. I'm trying to do better.
Well, I don't want to.
You know, I mean, everyone has their flaws, but yeah, you are more defensive about things that like, you're like, am I sure about this? Than things where you're like, I feel passionately that this is correct.
And I think everyone has known that. And when they've always had those exceptions. So even in the bad old days, you might have the most offensive jokes about a woman's appearance and certain things. You would say that to a certain woman in her face. And to me, it's like the best comedy.
Would you say that to your mother? Like,
The best comedy is the stuff you would be able to stand up on. I do that in the stuff that I write. Like, look, I would tell Ted Cruz this to his face. I would tell this to Six Cinema to their face. Like, you know, and when I write a review about some art, you know, it's like I feel people will try to get personalized about the work someone did. And it's like, look, this person's just trying to put something out there. I might not like it. I might make a zine, but
yeah.
And you've touched upon that where really being cruel in reviews became very hip for a while.
Oh yeah.
And that became, and it's like, well, you don't need to just make your point. There's a human being on the other end of everything you write. That's not the worst thing. So like and that what became this whole thing of what the Times view as like idea that somehow, what does that even mean? Like everyone needs to stifle their freedom of expression and pretend that they are not offended, or they get less offended, but no one can control that. People, you know, it's just, and the examples that woman gave in that tweet of yours that you responded to, and she's like, well, you know, I just want to say that trans people aren't really people, or that abortion is murder, and this sort of stuff. It's like, okay,
like, why can't I say those things? And the thing is, people were, yes, you did feel more comfortable saying those things a long time ago, because the person in the room who had the abortion wouldn't have felt like they had the power to speak up and be like, hey, I had an abortion. And, or, you know, the person who was trans and in the closet wouldn't have, you know, stepped up and said, you know, hey, that's actually me that you're talking about here. Because that's an incredibly uncomfortable thing to do.
It used to be so bad that you're more inclined to, the actual closeted person is more inclined to be the one, but fags or whatever, make fun of other people because of the pressure.
Because of that social pressure to go along with that. And what's happening is there is no longer as much social power to go along with shit. There's no longer as much, like, you know, you're not going to get in trouble if you say, hey, you're actually talking about me and that hurt my feelings. And we've all been in situations like that. The reason I don't make jokes about people drinking the Kool-Aid is because I did once a long time ago, and the person that I was talking to was related to people who died in, you know, the Jim Jones cult and everything. And I was like, wow, it never occurred to me that was like, you know, a real, actual, like, horrible, painful experience in people's lives. And I was just like saying this thing.
Same with suicide jokes that used to be very popular. People would make
it was just a thing that people say. Mm-hmm. And a lot of things that are just things that people say are in fact hurtful to, you know, someone. And I didn't fall over and die because, oh, I can't make that joke anymore, because what if someone in the room is related to someone from Jonestown? No, I mean, like, it's not that great of a joke to begin with, and why would I want to hurt people or, you know, sort of make light of a very serious situation in which a lot of people died? You know, it's,
I mean, a lot of that comedy, a lot of that commentary, it's bullying, and it's meant to be in a position of no one can talk back to me about it, and no one in the room is a member of that group. So I can fundamentally, you know, when people are talking about inner city Black homes in a negative sense in the Wall Street Journal, they presume their audience are all a bunch of suburban white people who've never had to work. When they talk about poor people, certainly they're not concerned about.
They don't think the poor people are going to be reading the Wall Street Journal because of how the Wall Street Journal is very expensive. Like, that's why they make it that expensive on purpose.
So it's a very exclusive club, and they get to kind of say what they want. And now things come out there so that people, you don't, it's presented and you can kind of like speak back to it. But I mean, if you can't take a little bloody nose from the stuff you write, not literally, like, I don't think people should assault you, but literally, like, that's what you essentially will get negative criticism about the stuff that you write.
I just got a weird message on Instagram, which I don't even go on, from some dude who was like, why were you so mean to Sarah Huckabee Sanders? What did she ever do to you? You're a bad writer. And I'm like, I'm not gonna be like, oh man, I'm being canceled by this guy, like, with no picture and 0 followers on anything. Like, no, I'm.
Yeah, there was one famous thing you'd said about some feedback you'd gotten. It was the most bizarre, and I've forgotten years ago, like someone had said something about it. It was a lovely photo of you, but someone had said something about it in response to it, and you're like, this is so weird. Why are you
Oh, Pancakes bitch would not fuck. I think that might have been it.
I don't know if that was in your when we met. I think that might have been in your description, your bio for a brief period.
Yeah, no,
very like, okay. It was always like some stranger needs to tell you they will not want to have sex with you.
Oh yeah.
Thing of
like, no, men love to tell me that they don't want to have sex with me, and I'm like, I was not aware that was on the table. It wasn't. Oh my God, I'm sorry, my allergies are so bad today.
Yay, spring!
Like, my face is itching.
Yeah.
Plus, I've taken Benadryl, so quite a wild time we're having here with me on Benadryl.
Yes. Well, it is the time. It's spring. Don't you feel the freshness in the air, and you can.
That, or I feel the air like attacking my eyes.
I have a little bit of that as well.
This is the thing. I sent you that article from The Atlantic by that lady who was just like, here are all the things that I can't talk about. And, there was the other lady who was like, here are all the things that I can't talk about. Hey, you're announcing all the things that you can't talk about, but without like presenting your fabulously nuanced opinions about them. Notice that no one's trying to publish that. No one's trying to publish like, oh, here's this person's actual nuanced opinions about the age of consent, because they don't actually have any. They just want to talk about how they can't talk about the age of consent, which I have talked about multiple times without, a bunch of people showing up at my house with like villagers showing up with like torches or anything like that. Yeah. Like I regularly say that I think it is messed up that it's not the same across the board, because I think it is messed up that, in one state something is rape and in another state it is not. I don't think that that's a great plan for America. But these people just want to say, here are all these things that I can't talk about, without actually ever talking about them or sharing what their great, compelling opinions are.
They can express why it is a controversial period. They want to be contrarian without doing the work. So, I could.
Or taking the risk.
Yes. So like often the person who writes the country, like a lot of people would do, okay, well, I want to make my name known. So a famous person has died who everyone loved. So I'm going to write that famous person was terrible review, because that's going to make me, that will stand out. Now, most likely, yes, it's very easy to write a Betty White is awesome because everyone believed that. You want to write your Betty White was actually terrible and was racist thing. You need to make that point in a compelling way while tap dancing on her grave. It's going to be hard, and most people aren't going to like it. And also, you might want to do some research so it doesn't turn out that, oh, actually, Betty White not only wasn't racist, she actually got her show canceled because she refused to like bend pressure from Southern racists and not have a guy. So she's actually awesome, and you suck as a person because you made this accusation about this dead woman who's wonderful. And when I was in school, in college in the early 90s, there would start to be the I mentioned the Rush Limbaugh, people trying to be Rush Limbaugh, and he was not particularly, they weren't insightful, it was just trying to be Rush Limbaugh, and our college paper would reject those columns. It was not, this is not overly woke, it's not overly liberal, it's a pretty conservative admin, right? But ultimately it was like, no, these aren't points. Like, you aren't making points. There was a period of like, you're just making ad hominem attacks. Like, there was still the sense of that's not going to go on our opinions page because that's not a point, right? And so, I mean, and how
it's not compelling. And this is the thing, like, if you actually, like I said this before, if you actually feel importantly about what you're saying, if you're saying something controversial, you know, you're willing to take your hits. Like, I criticize a lot of, you know, general like woo and psychic shit and all of that. And people actually do get really, really mad at me for saying they do not have magic powers. Because they're like, you're being condescending about my ability to see into the future and talk to your dead relatives. And they get mad at me. I get people yelling at me. I get people yelling at me for, you know, talking about Morgellons. That is actually a risk. Like, the last time that I wrote about it, I was like, do I really want to do this? Because those people are freaking vicious. And I said, yeah, no, I will. That's fine. If you're not willing to take like a risk in order to say something that you feel is really important, and you're not willing to also, you know, work really hard at presenting that point of view so that it is, you know, I mean, not defensible, but like, so that you're being clear about like why you are correct and you're sure that you're correct, then, you know, I can't help you.
And the Times presents this whole thing as being a culture of decline and how we're so free to speak. So again, it's not one thing to be, I wish this was what the world was like. You're now presenting the world in a way that it never was. So
yeah.
Now
that never happened.
Now we are freer to speak now than we were years ago. So to take this in two places, I think again, I do agree. I think you make the most compelling point. This is all about the hierarchy. So what people are complaining about, the objective truth is that there are more outlets for people to complain. So a 19-year-old TikToker is able to actually get, to read a Bret Stephens column and talk about how much garbage it is, and I could get as many clicks as Stephens column. Like, it could go viral. She has a platform that before it would, if she just written even the most precocious, well-written 19-year-old letter to the Times, would probably not get picked, or certainly would not be read by many people. So, but objectively, for people being able to express their views no matter what, I mean, Tucker Carlson is on primetime TV. There was nothing that could, even during the 80s, the height of the Reagan-Bush era, the idea of turning on 8 p.m., regular TV, not having to like go to some secret Klan meeting in the basement of a Pizza Hut or something, and where, this was on your couch watching nationalist rhetoric is just, or that you could be in a restaurant and see it. It just didn't happen in the 80s. And so now you have that degree of expression. And then and from the left wing, I would say that obviously Johnny Carson would never insult the president or talk about the president or politicians in ways that Stephen Colbert or Jimmy Kimmel have done, or talk about political issues as pointedly as they do. Not even David Letterman, David Letterman had even pulled a Bill Hicks segment from his show in '93 because he believed it was too controversial for the mainstream he was trying to approach when he moved to CBS. And this was just, he later aired it after Hicks died. It was essentially really attacking anti-abortion groups and pro-lifers, and nothing really that controversial by our standards, but at the time was pulled, canceled by Letterman himself. And so the idea of presenting things have gotten worse. It's just fundamentally untrue. People talk about losing jobs. It's like, well, because, and you made this.
Why don't they talk about at-will employment? And here's the thing: every time, without fail, I bring up to someone who is all like, cancel culture. Every time I bring up at-will employment, they're completely like, no, but that's fine, because you don't want to deprive the business owner of their like freedom to fire people. That is because what it is that is the hierarchy working as it's supposed to work. It's disadvantaging the right people. It's giving an advantage to the right people.
I just recall you're writing about this maybe couple years ago. It was pre-pandemic, so 10,000 years ago. And there was an immediate response of people with such certainty that this did not happen, that no one was ever fired for a frivolous reason. And obviously, and they were very important people. I've worked in employment law for this, and like that could never happen. And it's so easy for this, Waffle House waitress to then go to an attorney and get. And having worked in corporate America, I just was like, I didn't engage in it.
Absolutely is not. It is so expensive.
It seemed insane to me. It's like there's a saying from someone, from a writer. It's like, no company ever pays you enough to sue them successfully. That's like,
oh yeah, that was me. I think,
no, it's just like, that's not going to happen. Whoever you work for has more money for better lawyers. Even if you're working at Joe's Crab Shack, they've got a better lawyer than you.
That's why people have to do like class action suits and everything in order to see anything. And even then, it's still, I know people who have gone through with these, complaints and everything, and like these lawsuits, and it takes over their whole entire life. So it is just better for them to get a settlement and call it a day. The thing is that like it's.
But it's this belief. I think it doesn't go back to this idea also that no one wants to believe that this is the world we exist in. And sometimes when people firmly want to believe,
people want to believe that things are basically fair,
that they just get so trudged into it despite reality. So essentially, when the Crown Act was passed, you wrote about this, I think Friday, and everyone was like, yay. And of course, there was a typical, you expect conservatives to be jerks about it, but there were some on the left who were suddenly like, well, is there more important things to do? And blah, blah, blah. It's like, geez. Also, just a quick drive, the people who talk about, is there more important things to do, are also the ones who they're the ones who have, like, because they have a 2-week project, they can never do anything during that period. And then I would get promoted because it's like, well, my boss probably won't notice if it takes 2 weeks and 10 minutes. So during the middle of that project, if I take 10 minutes to do something for someone else, it looks like, wow, Stephen's really responsive. It's just like, oh no, here's some low-hanging fruit I can do while working on this very large project. So while the world is on fire, why don't we make sure that Black women can't lose their jobs because of, their hairstyles? But something that people would come up with would be, well, that couldn't have been happening. No one would have. And it's just it's infuriating. You want to strangle people because, like, you've never talked to a Black woman. You've never and like, I don't expect conservatives to care. But again, these are people, our so-called allies, who are like, that was a thing? That's a problem? I don't think so. That's just Pelosi doing something. No, like, it's.
Well, I think there is the perception with almost everything that, the way that we have things, like our laws, our systems, everything is basically good. And the flaws are with, people occasionally, like individuals acting badly, rather than this is a terrible system that we have. Maybe instead of like, picking out those individuals like individually, we just make it illegal for you to, not hire people because, you don't like their hair, or fire people because you don't like their hair. Like, that would be super great. I mean, I got fired for a headband, so.
And I think they have to spin those
stupid
things.
Applebee's.
They have to sort of spin those things as, we have to be very clear about, you can't do X, because what happens, and this has happened since, the civil rights movement, is certain things gets coded. So it's not like we're not hiring Black people. It's just that, oh man, we met all these Black people and they just weren't a culture fit. And
they just didn't have the right hair.
Have the experience. Then this Black lady with dreads, this white lady, well, she's gonna, and I've heard this, so she's just perfect with clients. It's like, oh, well, because our clients are in Texas and they love the 5'2" blonde lady. And look, she's competent, she's good at her job. It's just, yes, you're overtly giving into racism and saying that you will be able to sell more widgets with the 5'2" blonde lady who can connect with that culture better than the the Black woman with dreadlocks. And even when the Black woman changes her hair, she's still not going to get that promotion because of all these coded issues that come up. And they've done this with all sorts of hiring things. So you wind up having to really put it in there to make it what I've seen is you need to prove that it wasn't for this, because if it's
Yeah.
done with at-will employment, when it's like, if you put in a position of having to prove the employer didn't, that the employer distinctly fired you because you were Black or a woman, or because of or
because the problem is you can say, "Oh, I fired them for no reason."
Yes, or
and
like,
that's fine.
or you
And
could
then
come
the
up with
person,
any
the onus
type
is
of
on the employee. And I think in general, we're looking at this, we're used to the onus being on the person who is, lower in the hierarchy in general. Like that is what people are used to, that's the person who's supposed to shut up. That's the person who needs to prove that like the person above them fired them for a discriminatory reason. This is actually a fight that I got into with a lot of people on the left who felt that like our discrimination laws are totally enough to, deal with all of these issues and to, prevent discrimination from happening at work. And it's like, no, because, people went through, there was a phase for a minute that people went through. It was like, well, you can't discuss anything economic because that's bad. And it's to Bernie Sanders. And the thing is, with something like at-will employment, there is a social element to that makes it easier to deal with that social problem, because people's actual, like, I don't know, it makes it more difficult to do the thing that you don't want people to do.
Yes,
Actually.
that is what I was getting at before. If you present it as having to prove the employer that the employee who's terminated has to prove, and some of it is also, especially the binds of like culture. In fact, I liken it to in France. France has a tremendous issue with race and gender and certain things, and they're not going to say it's like, they will never say it's racist, and they'll never say anything like that or lookist or period. It's just that this is the what they define it as being French, fitting the culture.
Yeah.
So that is defined very narrowly. So and to the point where a Black woman born in France might find it harder to be French than the the white lady who just moved there, because she fits that idea of that. So certain cultures and corporate America has certain ideas of what is professional. So those things got became very well. Here's what our
it's not that we're racist; it's a culture thing.
It's like we don't have a hostile work environment. Our dress code, which could be a very sexist, specifically the types of clothing that women could wear, the types of clothing that, the places that said no hoodies for a while before Zuckerberg made hoodies acceptable, right? Like white people that you could wear that and put, but before hoodies, essentially anything that young Black people would wear would be deemed inappropriate, but young white people would be not. And then like if you were fired for that reason, you're going to have a pretty hard hill to climb to prove that it was because of racial discrimination. It's just like, no, even white people, we didn't know white people were told they couldn't wear Timberlands or dreadlocks, and that's being fairly applied. I mean,
actually, there should be a law against white people wearing dreadlocks like that.
No white boy dreads is a Robyn.
Please no.
So I mean, that's always been, so you need to be very specific with those laws. I mean, Republicans are anti-regulation for that reason, because the broader it is, the easier it is for them to kind of,
because what it is they're creating a law that's general but only really specifically impacts one group of people.
No frizzy hair, for instance. And it's great. I mean, I've worked in corporate, have worked in corporate in the 90s that have these memories of like literally this, and this was a Latina, she was like horrified and insulted. It was at a major firm in the city, of accounting firm, but it was essentially no frizzy hair is not acceptable. And so like things that are just, you just look at it like, well, this is so insanely racist. But beyond that, just being told,
because and then they're like, oh well, there's people like my hair's flat ironed right now. Then people are like, well, Robyn couldn't wear her hair like it is normally either. So therefore,
that becomes the one example, being that it's not really
that's what I'm saying. Like, they are able to come up with one example, and then it's like, well, nope, therefore not racist because this broad has frizzy hair.
And when your identity is essentially presented as inherently unprofessional, and that you need to strip away as much of that as you can before you can go into the workplace and thus succeed in the workplace, and there's always a chance you can flip, is terrible. So, as things go, I was disappointed with any so-called liberal, leftist, whatever, progressive who wasn't cheering the Crowns Act, because this is obviously very important, and it's an
economic issue.
You will be able, there's protections for Black women in the workplace, ways that it will keep. I mean, and it's still potentially, there's still barriers to advancement. There's still barriers for that. It's how people view, but I'm glad that that's been passed. And that's something that,
and again, I'd rather not have to do this so piecemeal. I would much rather, I mean, this is good because it covers things for other reasons, especially like school dress codes and things like that. But it would be really great if, like, no, you just couldn't fire someone for their hairstyle, period, unless it was very clear that it interfered with their job on some level. Like, that would be great. Put the onus on the employer. Stop trying to do everything piecemeal. We're like, well, okay, we're just going to keep adding people and things that you can't discriminate against, instead of just like saying, no, you can only fire people if they are bad at their job.
Yes. I mean, it's tough. I mean, and I think one thing I found, because of how discrimination works, the one thing is that there are people, obviously, this, that they succeed in, we benefit from situations, myself as a Black person, I benefit from sexism, you might benefit from racism, and it becomes hard for us to acknowledge where we might have benefited from a corrupt system. So we want to believe at least our part of the system has not been corrupt, because we don't want to live with the idea that, did I get this job or this opportunity?
Well, that's why you find people, defending hierarchical institutions that do not benefit them, because they don't want the ones that do benefit them to go away.
Yeah. One thing I'd sent you before we took off, I was amused by the Kristen Cinema piece that it posted, that had come out, of just how essentially horrible a person she is. She was from a potential book that's coming out, where she's publicly deriding President Joe Biden. She is at GOP fundraisers, which should be confusing, and praising Andy Biggs, who's terrible, and was
on multiple levels.
And she's terrible. I mean, one thing I've written is that we will have to think less about her and Manchin, who killed a qualified applicant for the Fed this week. We'll have to think less about them after this year, because unfortunately, the best case scenario is that we wind up with 52 seats and they are irrelevant, or we are at 48, and then Mitch McConnell will do his "thank you for your services" evil villain trapdoor thing, because then the no longer useful. So I just don't see how we stay at 50. There's enough, given kind of how these elections go. We either run a table or we lose the table. I would love if we wound up staying there, but at the same time, I'm also just so done with having to deal with Cinema's crap, and just the frustration of, like, as bad as Rubio and Cruz and Cotton are, they were, if you're a Republican, it's like, these are the junkyard dogs who were elected post Tea Party, the resistance to Obama. This is my team, and this is how they hate Democrats, and they're on our side. But yet somehow, like, it's like we're fighting the empire, and we get someone who's kind of like, stormtroopers are kind of cool. It's like, what? I mean, are you not been paying attention to what's going on? So she wants to hang out with Ted Cruz, and she wants to do all this. She loves Republicans who are terrible, actively bad, and fascists. And she's a first-term senator, and she should not be naive to this. So she's just fundamentally, and just sort of how she's thumbed her nose at everyone who helped get her elected, people of color specifically came out and canvassed for her. So yeah, she's, I don't know, it's profoundly frustrating. Biden has expressed confusion as to why she's awful. Some other people have expressed confusion as to why she's awful. I'm
not confused about why she's awful. Yeah. I'm never confused about why people are awful, though.
I think we're both that way of like, well, this person is terrible, and it seems to be it's a very consistent.
When I was younger, and I'd be like, oh, maybe they're, bullying me because they have a bad home life. But like, I'm an adult now. Like, I'm not really like trying to figure that one out. Sometimes people just suck.
Yeah, it's just weird, though, why you would cozy, how self-involved you have to be to cozy up with a party that is actively, it's not, I mean, whatever her beliefs are, like she could switch beliefs. So she's professed to be pro-choice and professed to be, who cares? Like she could switch on that as a vine, like Veep. But she has twice voted to impeach Trump, and Trump is not even, he's more unstable than the 2016 guy, the 2022 guy, 2024 guys, like no one who ever crossed me can endure. So in the Republican Party right now, any Republican who at any point had challenged Trump, and that's in their past, there's no quarter for. So this idea, and even Democrats are like, oh, well, she could switch parties. Like, well, no, I feel like she's committed this original sin that he will never forgive. Maybe McConnell would for purposes of holding the seat in Arizona or whatever, but Trump would just throw a grenade.
I don't know. I feel like as soon as you compliment him, if he starts getting compliments, you're in.
Yeah. I mean, that used to be the case even, and I agree, but Nancy Mace is another example. She's been very pathetic about trying to curry his favor. He won't let go, and she did not even vote to impeach him, but she's not let go of like any past criticism about the whatever. Yeah. So I do think that he's gotten even past that you can flatter him. I think he's been holding on, which is just sort of, I wish people would make the argument more clearly that he is fundamentally more unstable than he ever was. Like he's just like, God help us.
So you're saying he's not a very stable genius?
No. Usually people who like, I am a stable genius, I am not. I guess we should talk to about hoping next week that maybe Jamie can join us to talk about the week of hearings. They're starting soon for
yes, that would be awesome.
Which would be terrible. I mean, I think Josh Hawley's already dropped the QAnon crap, because that's suddenly started to be normalized, right? Like just accuse your opponents of being pedophiles and so forth. And I think Democrats should be able to prepare for the fact of like, we're going to nominate public defenders to judgeships and public defenders' jobs. They aren't all scuzzy mob lawyers. Their job is to there are
also some very nice mob lawyers.
Yes.
No, I'm actually not even kidding. Like
no, yes, I meant.
Cicilline from Rhode Island, his dad was a mob lawyer, and yeah, I mean, yeah, I can say that. And he he defended my Uncle Carmine for free, who was not in the mob. He was, he had his other issues, but I
was thinking more generally the idea of like in mob movies of that guy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like in real life, like in real life, people have to. Everyone needs a defense. Everyone gets a defense, and so it is fair that so I and public defenders will to present it as like somehow, and even as a judge, she's soft on sex offenders because she doesn't always give them the max, or she does not treat all sex crimes the same. I mean, many people have stated that a lot of our rules for sex offenders coming out of prison is just to make it impossible for them to function in society. Like it's a constant scarlet P for pervert, so no one wants to live near them, no one wants to hire them. So like, well,
Well, I mean, you have to figure out like what exactly you want people to do. But one thing that I was just gonna say that occurred to me, bringing it back to the beginning, for a very long time, culturally, defense lawyers were considered like, the skeeziest of all possible human beings. And man, when you think about that, that does seem like a racket. Like that does not seem like, that seems like a not great.
Well, because
thing that we should have been doing.
It was right. Again, in the media, there was Perry Mason and Matlock and stuff like that. The noble helping someone who's clearly innocent, and then because of a lot of, Law and Order was such a huge franchise and such a huge event of presenting. So essentially, they're obviously most of those people are guilty. So you're seeing someone who's essentially trying to keep someone we know is a murderer, who knows is a offender out of prison, and that is certainly spinning. They would often depict defense attorneys in negative ways, with few exceptions. And a lot of TV shows would focus on very unethical defense attorneys. So sometimes they would have people who practice sort of quote unquote good guy law, where it's always like helping someone out who's, marginalized or but often they would just depict the guys at the big corporate firms who do whatever they can for their big money clients. And certainly that happens. I mean, a lot of corporations are not necessarily great actors in their legal people are certainly trying to cut corners to do something, but it is essentially, as you were saying, spun to make defense attorneys look bad as opposed to corporations. So no one comes from that being like, wow, corporations are really
like, oh, they're greedy and bad, and
the tobacco industry is really bad. It's like, no, these attorneys are bad. They're the ones who, that's the face of it. It's like the attorneys for the tobacco industry. So but so what do you? I mean, obviously, Monday's your last day. Then you have your spring break until you come back. Are you spring breaking anything exciting?
Yeah. I keep saying that I'm gonna do a thing on Laura Eisenhower, who's Eisenhower's great granddaughter, and believes that aliens are responsible for the whole Ukraine situation. So I might look into that a little.
Are they?
Obviously, yes. Duh. Also, chemtrails. I don't know.
Oh man, I don't.
Chemtrails responsible for everything since whenever someone came up with chemtrails.
I think people believe in things that seem to be fundamentally untrue, and it's always surprising to me. But
I find it interesting. I hate that I find it interesting, but I find it freaking interesting. I'm like, wow, you came to those conclusions. I need to know more about that and how it occurred.
I think it's very important that you did do this. I know that you wrote a lot about QAnon before, when it was dismissed as sort of fringe and like, why is this a thing? And it would be often people would sometimes sort of kind of pretentiously be like, oh, this is not, we should be focused on important kitchen table issues, not these extreme right now. But that wound up in getting all into our national discourse beyond even Marjorie Greene. I think then when she was elected, everyone was like, oh, well, she'll just be in a corner some way, the wacky, maybe, no worse than Steve King.
The wacky out we keep in the attic.
Yeah. And I think she's more powerful than Steve King ever was. So I think we don't dismiss the crazies, don't dismiss what people are believing out there. It's very, it's dangerous to do that. So.
Well, no, I think I think it is. I think if people legitimately are believing something, it's worthwhile to find out why what it is they're believing, why they're believing it, because that's, kind of the only way you can do better, I think.
Well, thank you for a great chat. We will hopefully sync up maybe with Jamie and be able to get to the nitty gritty of this week of Supreme Court stuff. So have
because neither of us are, simple country lawyers.
Well, I mean, this has nothing to do with the law. It's all going to be about who can yell the loudest. But unfortunately, a lot of Democrats believe it does have something to do with the law. So that will be a potential challenge. But all right, have a great today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, guys.